We will now move on to session 5 with Gabeba, Manreet, and Kamini Dandapani on the topic From Xenophobia to Xenopolis, the need to transcend, a very relevant topic which emphasizes importance of overcoming fear of the unfamiliar to build inclusive, thriving global communities. I cannot go without mentioning how these three authors are celebrated for their compelling storytelling style that bridges cultures and explores themes of identity and belonging. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming for this post-lunch session. Our topic today is from Xenophobia to Xenopolis. And I'm really honored to have Manreet and Gabeba with me. And the three of us have worked on very, very different places and times. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this common topic is going to be covered by us. And I think what we'll find out is that no matter what the place and what the time, human nature has remained constant, both the ugly and the beautiful. And hopefully we'll get a vision of both here. So perhaps I will start today by talking about my own work. I have written a book on Rajaraja Chola, who was an emperor in southern India over 1,000 years ago. So I'm taking you way, way back in time to a small region in central Tamil Nadu along the delta region of the great Kaveri River. And now we're in the 7th century, 6th, 7th, 8th century CE. And it's a time of great ferment and great chaos. Like there's lots of little clans and tribes, and I don't even know if you can call them dynasties, all vying for power, for position, for little tracts of land. These were all very, very local powers fighting with each other, trying to get control of the next village, the village beyond. That was what it was. So the concept of kingship, the concept of kingdoms, the empires, all that was in a very state of great flux, actually. Nothing had coalesced to what we know of such terms today. And in that time, in southern India, they had the Cheras in Kerala, you had the Pallavas in northern Tamil Nadu, the Rashtrakutas and Chalukyas in the Deccan region, the Pandyas in deep Tamil Nadu, each controlling little tracts of land and fighting with each other to, as I said, go a little beyond their immediate borders. A few centuries of this later, there came an emperor called Rajaraja Chola, whose domain was around the great Kaveri Delta and a few villages around there. These were small villages, each of which had a small temple, very hyper-local. And in the 6th and 7th centuries, you had the Bhakti saints like Andal and Sambandar, writing in Tamil and Malayalam about the little temples and the villages, and they made those places very, very holy. They had a great holy association in those lands. Along comes Rajaraja out of this milieu of small hyperlocal powers, and he set about methodically conquering one village after another until he built up this great kingdom that covered all of peninsular South India and part of Sri Lanka. This was a situation that was ripe for xenophobia because, as I said, these were clusters of villages, each of which had a very particular culture. They had different ways of worshipping. They spoke different languages. They were people who worked on the fields. They were pastoral people, fisher people, traders, all sorts of people who, for the first time under Rajaraja in southern India, were kind of compelled to come together into what we call a kingdom or an empire. And as I said, the situation at that time was one of chaos, instability, but Rajaraja was a very strategic thinker. He knew that if his empire were to last, if he wanted any kind of longevity, he needed to create something that would bring his people together, that would create a sense of unity, of oneness, of a common purpose. And what he did was build a temple in his capital town of Tanjavur, which is a medium-sized city in central Tamil Nadu. It's called the Brihadishwara temple. It is one of the most stunning temples anywhere in the world. You must go and see it if you can. And it was the tallest structure in India at the time, and it remained the tallest structure for a long time. And why was it so extraordinary? It was something completely unseen up until that point, because the temples until then were little village temples, 2 or 3 stories high, and they had a very rich history of association with a particular bhakti saint who had traveled there, who had lived there, who wrote about that particular temple. But this temple was this gigantic structure. He kind of modeled it out after Mount Meru, you know, he almost brought the Himalayas down to southern India. And it also had no prior religious association for anybody. So in a way, he created this symbol, just like we have the flag today or a national anthem, that meant the same thing to everybody. Okay, so his thinking was, how do I bring this ragtag collection of people together? And he did it with the most important institution in India at the time, which was the temple. And everybody was drawn into the working of the temple. They were all invested in it. Any person could donate. Women donated, the poor donated what they could. Rich people, powerful people, anybody who donated had their name inscribed on the temple walls. And so that was a prestige that is present to this day. You know, it's like you go to a hospital or someplace, you see this plaque with a list of donors. That is what the temple was. And then everybody was asked to contribute to the running of the temple, like they paid taxes or they contributed milk or flowers or in some way. So that was how he brought together a ragtag, a completely diverse assortment of people into a kingdom, and it lasted for a few centuries. So, I mean, Rajaraja was not a saint. He was brutal, he was covetous, he was all of that, but he was also strategic, he was also generous, he also saw the need to find something in common to bring people together. So that is, you know, xenophobia to Xenopolis 1,000 years ago. So I'd like Manreet and Gabeba to talk about their own experiences in very different countries, because I think there's a common thread that runs through all our stories. So would you like to go first?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. This is an important topic, and I think when we ourselves, either in our own lives, have practiced this transformation of strangers into our people, I think that is something we need to share. So I'll share 2 examples with you from my country of South Africa, which, as you know, is most infamous for its divisions, for apartheid, but also for the people who fought that, like Mandela and his compatriots. I want to talk about a new book called Riotous Deathscapes by my friend and colleague Hugo Kakanam. The riotous deathscapes might sound to you like a dire answer to the question, can we turn strangers into friends? But what this describes is an area of the southern part of South Africa, the Eastern Cape, where Hugo lived and was born, where I was born as well. But I lived in Cape Town on the southwestern part. But what Hugo describes here in an area of the country called Mpondo land is a practice of inclusion, of literally making strangers into family, that is available in how people live with one another, their ways of dealing with horrendous poverty and destructiveness of the environment, of capitalism. But he gives a very interesting example that will possibly, because we share the colonial overlords of the British, may seem familiar to you. Because the coastline of South Africa is very stormy, there would occasionally be very famous shipwrecks, right? Among them, the Grosvenor and other shipwrecks, which would be wrecked on the southern coast of the country. And there would be some survivors. And those survivors would be brought into the local communities of the Eastern Cape, and they would become part of those communities, part of the families of those communities, to the extent that when rescue parties would reach there, and months, sometimes years later, many of those people did not want to go back. They did not want to be rescued from these communities that had actually turned them from strangers into members of their people. They were their people. I think this is not a technical matter. It's not that you can give a passport or you can say, all right, this is your house, this is the salary. a sense of belonging is a subtle, profound exchange and building between people. You can't simply stamp belonging onto somebody. So the capacity to grow one's community beyond division, and often through a tragedy, right? A shipwreck or a loss. This is a tragedy. But from that, to grow a sense of belonging so strong that you feel no need to leave and be rescued from it. This is a lesson that Hugo Karkenham teaches us in Riotous Deathscapes, which is in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. I am from the Western Cape in South Africa, born in the Eastern Cape, but raised in the Western Cape. In that space, which is a place shaped by genocide, the Dutch settlers practiced a brutal form of hunting of human beings in that area. So it's a place marked by genocide. Slavery, my own ancestors were enslaved people brought from India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. This is why I look the way I look, a very mixed person, reflecting that mixed ancestry. Those enslaved people were eventually the majority of the population of the Cape Colony. They spoke many different languages from all around the Indian Ocean region. They were facing the extraordinary violence of slavery. But in that space, they created a new language that is the language of Afrikaans. And many of you will know that language because it was used in a very oppressive way under the regime of apartheid. But the secret history of that language is that it was a Creole language created by enslaved people and the underclass of the Cape Colony. And that language articulated the survival of people from very different regions, meant to compete with one another and be enemies with one another. But together they founded a community that survived together and eventually created the basis of a flourishing culture in the Western Cape that is very unique. It is a culture of great tolerance and inclusiveness, and has been in the past. Of course, it has been subjected itself to enormous pressures, to the pressure of patriarchy and sexism, along with racism and capitalism. But there is in that history a remarkable example that even the poorest, even the most oppressed of people can create a community that includes, that embraces and is hospitable mutually to one another, and then becomes the basis of a culture that lasts even until today. So these are two examples, and I'm so grateful to learn of more, whether the institutions that make us whole are large or whether they are unseen and invisible. I think shall we say, the technologies that we human beings have created for building such just necessary, vital ways of surviving and growing together is something that we definitely need to share more of.
Thank you. Yeah. That was fabulous. I didn't know about this. So.
No, that was wonderful. I think Gabeda's example and Kamini's across time and space. So I thought I will go from southern India, we've gone to South Africa, and I'll bring you back to a city that is very close to us, which is New York City, and my experience when I moved there 10 years back, and what I have learned in terms of encountering strangers and making them part of your own community. I remember in the very early days when I was in Manhattan and we were taking a yellow cab. So I get into the cab with my daughter, we're going for a dentist appointment, and the driver, once I tell him the address and he starts driving, and then he says something in Punjabi. It's a word, but you know, as in all languages, it is a shorthand for many things. It's roughly the equivalent of howdy. He says kidda. Now kidda is a Punjabi word you will understand or comprehend only if you've grown up in Punjab, not if you are a Delhiite or somebody from North India. It's a shorthand for saying, how are you doing? And then we had a conversation, and that person, the driver, was, once I spoke with him, I realized was a Sikh, had come from Punjab. Obviously, he was not wearing a turban at that point in time, and which is what my my 12-year-old daughter very excited. She's making these eyes at me and saying, "This is so creepy. How does this man know where you come from?" Anyway, to cut a long story short, we are at the dentist, and later when we are leaving, I tell her, that's why you need to know your mother tongue, because he saw me, and I wear this is the kada, which is a Punjabi Sikh. If you are, you will typically see it on the wrist of every such person. And I said, he saw me, he recognized, and decided to speak with me in that particular word, which would immediately tell him whether I was a stranger or I was somebody he could claim is not a stranger anymore. And as I have lived in New York, almost every second day, I guess, I consider myself very fortunate, because being in the city and being obviously a person who is not white, who probably is considered, I've had people come up to me and say, "Mami, habla español." They assume I'm Hispanic. I am always using my broken Spanish on them. I had people hail me, "Didi, Fifth Avenue is kaise jaane ka?" Like, I've had all these conversations with people, and I think the only reason they happen is because these are people who are clearly more fresh immigrants than I am, because I've had more years behind me now. But I feel that New York City is a city which truly, to me, is that place where strangers and strangers becoming your own people or your community, the distance is really small. And it was brought to me very vividly during the time of COVID, for instance, when the city literally emptied out. But we were one of those families. In our building, we were just 1/3 of occupants still staying there. And we lived close to the park. So in the evening, the park was a time you could step into and take off your mask, because, there was space enough to keep a safe distance. And it was like these ghost figures, somebody's walking their dog, and then you just kind of wave to each other. And I think, for me personally, I've been in the city for 6 years, but that was a time when I really thought that the city rallied. We came together, whether it was volunteering at the community, at the church, and packing lunch boxes for people who were elderly and could be delivered to their home, or walking somebody's dog because that person is elderly, or the 6 p.m. banging of applause and banging bells to applaud the workers in our hospitals, the doctors, and all the volunteer staff. And I feel a city like New York, with all its problems, to me really is a shining example of strangers coming together and saying, how do we make it work? It's a very strategic city, like Raja Chola's. It's driven by a very strategic desire to, but the city, when you dwell in the city, it gives you that feeling. And I just want to go back to another example of a place I come from, which is very intimately associated with me as a Punjabi, as a Sikh, which is Golden Temple in Amritsar. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to go there, but it is sort of the essential shrine for the Sikh community. And just a background, the Sikh faith is quite a recent faith. It arose as a bridge between Hinduism and Islam, and Guru Nanak, who founded it, that was his vision for the faith. And what I like about the Golden Temple is that it has 4 doorways, which are always open, and the idea is that it's open to everybody. And there is the concept of langar, which is a universal kitchen. So anybody can walk into the temple, go to the kitchen and have langar. The only requirement is that everybody sits on the floor and eats on these floor mats that are laid out. Everybody eats there. And as the story goes, the great Mughal Emperor Akbar, when he wanted to visit, he sat on the floor and ate just like anybody else.
Oh, wow.
And the Golden Temple to me is a shining example in a world which we feel is so materialistic and so creating strangers of each one of us, creating strangers of even families. It's a place where everybody is welcome, everybody is given a space, and everybody has can expect to be treated with dignity and is treated as such. So I think, the idea that we can extend a community and say that we are all sort of have come from the same cloth, and there is a way to put that together is what, today's topic about transcending that otherness and saying there is no other really. We're all in this together.
So beautifully put, and it's so true. I think most of us here, maybe all of us here in this room, are immigrants. We've come from somewhere and made this our home. We have two homes. And I think it's up to us to look at it as a positive rather than what have we lost, but what have we gained. And we all live our lives at multiple levels, right? We have the smallest microcosm, which is our family, and then our own community, whether we're Tamil or Punjabi or South African. I mean, I'm sure you have your own. For me, like South Africa is one, but you know the little microcosms within. And then, bigger and bigger layers of which we are part. And I think we should live our lives equally in all of them and not closet ourselves in that. And that's when you discover, you go out of your little world and you see that humanity is the same. And I've lived through several horrible events in two cities. One was New York City. I was there during 9/11, which was, it was just completely unreal. My children were in school. I had to go get them. They watched one of the planes flying into the towers. In that time of absolute horror, I witnessed countless acts of kindness, of generosity, of complete strangers opening their homes, just whatever they could. There were shops handing out bottles of water. New York just came together like that in the midst of horror. So I think if we can tap into that and remind ourselves that that exists through everything else, the world will be a better place. And then the other time I witnessed horror was in Delhi. You alluded to it in 1984, October, when Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, and the city was, it was just ugliness on a scale that it still makes me tear up and get gooseflesh when I think about it. But even in that, you had people opening their homes to Sikhs, to protect them, to shelter them. But I think the ugliness prevailed. I mean, you said how 1984 was like 1947 all over again. And each of us can, I think, play a role in stemming that. However bad things are around, I think we should play our role in just opening our hearts to human beings. And also we need to learn from history. This, as you said, history is, I think you said that last, it's a cycle that keeps repeating itself. So what can we do to have the good wheel turning, so.
Yes, I wonder if we can share some of our work as well.
Of course, yes.
I would like to read you two poems, one of which is about the experience of being an immigrant, because it's just so immediately, I think, for us all. In fact, even people who are not immigrants, to whom I read this poem, recognize something about having to declare your entire being through one moment, and all of that dimensions of your whole being, how can you translate it into something as simple as a passport or an identity document? But as usual, I have to stand.
Yes, please.
Please.
It's a very short one. I cannot myself. To come to this country, my body must assemble itself into photographs and signatures. Among them, they will search for me. I must leave behind all uncertainties. I cannot myself be a question. Then I want to read to you something else, which is about the great hopes that South Africa represented in its new incarnation when we all voted for the first time. For the first time, I was 25, I voted for the first time in 1994, because before then there were laws that made some people human and other people not worthy of a vote. But we changed that, but we didn't actually make our dreams come true. So there are lessons to be learned about the mistakes that we made, as well as the dreams for which so many fought and died. When we think about Nelson Mandela at the apex of that 1994 ascension to the presidency of South Africa, I want you to also think about the 27 lonely years, the 27 years when even his face was banned. And it's easy to make a hero out of somebody. Never forget that he had comrades. He didn't want actually to just be seen as the one person. But I think about him before everybody was celebrating him, in the loneliness of that cell. And I think about what had kept him going. It was the vision of a country that would be different. And in this poem, I try to think about what I call that promised land and some of the ways in which we didn't live up to that dream. This is a poem inspired by a musician named Moses Molalekwa, who was one of those geniuses that come maybe once in 100 years. Promised land. Bird cry in the keys, gliding to a low ending. Hummingbird fingers quiver, dip, and still a note to almost nothing. Then you begin again, training my heartbeat to follow. I listen to you at night when I'm lonely and not sure anymore. So old at 18, you and not you led us to where stillness trembles into rapture and rapture into knowing we exist, even if existence is thin as breath. I hear your breath in the notes. Your father played you bird like he was family, and your grandfather gave you marabi, so you came from a long line before the future opened in you. And even then you looked back like the angel of history, raising your wings into the yet to come, but facing the direction you had left. 16 years ago, yours was the CD I packed in my suitcase to tell without words where I'm from. Not just the music, but the new intricate country we understood was impossible. The millennium ended after 1 year with your death, presaging our other losses. Now I've lived past my youth and also the silences I kept back then. Moses, why even today do we barely speak of Florence, who made the music happen and last, and lay at your feet that night, no words anymore between you, but hers were the first to stop. Even here, she is at the end of the story, her voice stilled. Unsolved, they say, but is it because we've agreed not to ask? Was her silence the price of yours? Our forgetting is also our home and why we never left the old country. Now it is the after, and I have grown into the questions. Listening in the dark, I'm lonely and not sure anymore. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Did we have the bell for
Q&A.
questions?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've been rather rushed for questions in the previous sessions, so please, if you have questions of any of us, please go ahead. You have some time for that. So.
Wonderful.
Hello, my name is Roshni. I really enjoyed your talk. So my question really is just to know your views about illegal immigrants, because in today's political environment, everybody seems to agree that, you know, those who came here, who had the privilege to migrate to America through their education or through their family, there's no, no controversy. Everyone loves them. At least in theory, they all love them. But in today's political environment, I've seen people just completely coming to an agreement that if you are here illegally, because they absolutely have nothing, no other, people from Venezuela or wherever they are coming from, there's a common agreement that they should not be here. And I've even heard people saying that, comparing them with like non-humans, like they just doesn't deserve to exist here. I'd like to know your view on that. Thank you.
Anybody wants to go?
Everyone here, how blessed we are to be who we are. I don't want to make assumptions about all the difficulties that we've all navigated, but we're blessed to be here. I think, but for the grace of God, it might be me who is struggling, holding my hand across a fence. I would never, ever want to use the capacity that I have, which is to be safe and loved, to say to somebody else, you have no right to what is mine. I think that if this country can only feel safe by excluding the most vulnerable, the most in need of help, then it should look at itself and ask, what kind of a country are we? It is currently an ally of many countries that are in trouble. So can it be an ally also of the most vulnerable? I think the country I want to live in would be that kind of country.
Well put.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm totally with you. We need compassion, we need empathy, we need to know the foundation on which our country was built. So, and we have the poem, the give us supper, the huddled masses. So where is all that in this thinking? So I don't have any answer to the particulars about how we go about it, but I think demonizing people and othering them and calling them names it's really horrific. So.
I want to add to what obviously Gabeba and Kamini have said, and I think any time when we are faced with questions like this, which try and reduce any debate or argument to binaries, legal, illegal, immigrant, non-immigrant, is a time when we should step back and remember that wherever we are at this point in time, and it's not just us, anybody, as Gabeba said, the person whose hand is across the fence, each one of us is there at that point in time because there is an entire arc of history behind us. When you stand at the beach and that wave laps at you, that wave has traveled a long distance and many miles over many months to reach you. And what I'm trying to say is that if we feel that these people have come here, remember that we, today's Western world, were colonizers who went to all these other nations uninvited and decided that they would ransack, extricate, extract whatever they could from those lands. A lot of those people are here because they were there. And that's the arc of history.
Yeah.
So let's not get trapped in the binaries and the silos. Always remember, there's a long arc of history, and let's bring our compassion, our knowledge of history, our understanding to all of these arguments. They're never as plain. They want you to assume it's a very plain argument. It's not.
It's not.
Never is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So Mike, excellent discussion, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for all the points. The topic that we have for the session, from xenophobia to Xenopolis, right? It's a great concept, but I personally, my view is what we are seeing in the world, what's winning elections for people is just the reverse of this, right? More xenophobia is actually winning elections in different countries. So my question is, from xenophobia to Xenopolis, is that a utopian concept or is there hope?
Is it utopian or is it?
Is there hope?
Hope.
I think utopias are never useless. Any great achievement has started with a utopian idea, and a utopia is simply what seems impossible at a particular moment. But it's a dream that you build from the impossible to the achievable. So yes, I agree completely. The reality is it's actually better for political success to exacerbate conflict. I've seen this in my own country where some of the leaders have attained greater power because they've created more violence, because they've created more division, because they've created more poverty and blame. So again, this requires, as Manreet says, for us to not immediately jump into that invitation. The invitation feels very urgent. It feels we must immediately, directly respond. And in fact, what all of these other traditions that we've been alluding to have said is work in small, quiet, and loving ways. Yeah. Because it's a long process to build something. very quickly we can destroy it. But for heaven's sake, must we repeat all the time the destruction, the cycles of destruction, followed by long, hard work of building again? I would prefer to short-circuit that and just cut out the destruction a little bit, please. We have so much to do. But that requires us then to say, okay, how does it work among our communities? You know, the people that we know and love and speak to, maybe around the dinner table, the family conversations, how come our people are also falling prey to those narratives of division? So those of us who want to build something must find a stronger way to convey our story about how necessary we are to one another. You know, the most brilliant ideas, the most astounding inventions can come from somebody you despise one day, right? And they, in fact, can help to change and make the world infinitely better than it is. So I feel we must learn to tell our story of the Xenopolis more strongly, more appealingly, more invitingly.
Absolutely, and it is in our hands after all. We have the power, our voices to make this happen. It's not some abstract somebody out there who's making the world what it is.
We've mentioned two people here, Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi, who in their time people said, you're not going to achieve what you... Yeah. I remember 1911, New Delhi was being built by the British government who saw themselves, they saw themselves there for another 250, 300 years. In 1947, they were gone. So the arc of history, when it turns very quickly. The idea is to stay the long course, to keep emphasizing what is important. And, you know, I don't know how many of you here are into Urdu shairi and ghazals, but there is a very famous ghazal, and I'll just recite a couplet because I think it sums up so beautifully how things are overnight destroyed and how much time it takes to build. And building is the hard work. It says, आग का क्या है पल दो पल में लगती है बुझते बुझते एक ज़माना जाता है. So, you know, the idea is always you want to be doing the work. The work is required. The glibness, the baiting people will get you short-term victories, and let the political leaders who want them get those victories. But the long arc, you stick to it, you follow it, and you're convinced in your heart, that'll get you to where you want. You know, the Xenopolis, the city that you want to build, the community you want to build.
You should never lose hope. I mean, utopia can be reality, I think so.
Show empathy to the most vulnerable. What a beautiful thought. I'll carry that within myself forever. We all can relate to what Manreet shared about her experience of how she was connecting with strangers and building a comfortable environment in a new land. We have all gone through that. And even during times of horror and loneliness, we have always been fortunate to witness acts of kindness every day. And that gives us faith in humanity. Thank you all. Manreet and Kamini will be available to sign books outside for the next 15 minutes. So please proceed to the designated book signing area if anyone would like to purchase.